All right, so uh, we talked about we've talked about so far. We've talked about scientific method, right? We talked about that last time a little bit, right? Where we we perceive the question about kind of what's happening. We see something going on, and we want to know what's happening. So in a specific situation, so we look at it, we describe it, and so we perceive a question about what's going on, right? Then we want to form a hypothesis. Then we want to test the hypothesis. Then we want to draw conclusions, and then we want to report our results, right? That's a scientific method, correct? Okay, so that's what we look at, right? But then when we look at methodology about how we go about doing things, we're going to look at some different ways that we do that, okay, within psychology, okay. Like when we look at methodology, it would be like, so if we saw kids being aggressive, right? So we saw kids being aggressive, and we're like, why are they aggressive? Okay, so if we saw kids being aggressive, and we go, okay, what were they doing prior to this? Okay, so I think that in the book, the example it gives is they were, I just went blank. They were watching violent cartoons, I think is what it was. Okay, so my thought process was like, okay, well, one that they've harped on for years and years and years was like violent video games. Right, that was my thought process. So, so you see kids being violent, and like, okay, what did they do before this? Well, okay, they were playing a really violent video game. So we perceive the question, right? The first thing in scientific methodology is we got to perceive the question. We got to know what is happening. So we go, okay, what did they do before this? What was happening? Okay, well they were watching an intense video game, or they were playing an intense video game. All right, they were real aggressive, so they were playing a really intense video game. We got to ask questions like, why were they aggressive? And then we got to describe, what's happening, right? So we got to be descriptive of what they were doing. So maybe these kids, let's just have a different scenario than what's in the book. So maybe these kids were playing an intense video game. So we're just going to make up a video game, okay? Let's call it Death Eater 99, okay? Where you just kill everybody, all right? All right, it's intense, chainsaws, right? You slice and dice, and you gouge out people's eyeballs, all right? That's the point of the game, all right? All right, so these little kids are playing this game, all right? And so after they've played this game, they go and play with other kids, and they're just being super aggressive, all right? We're just pretending, okay? And but they saw these kids being aggressive, and they wondered why. And they saw, okay, well, they're playing this video game. So they're assuming, right, that this video game had an influence, okay? So when you perceive the question, you want to come to a tentative explanation. So you want to do a hypothesis, right? So the second part of this is you form a hypothesis, right? So our observations were kids got aggressive after they played Death Eater 99. Right? So that's what we perceived, right? So our hypothesis might be kids who play Death Eater 99 are more aggressive. Correct? Because that's what we perceived, that's what we saw. All right? In my example, that's what we saw. Correct? All right, so next thing we have to do is, since we've got a hypothesis, which is kids who play Death Eater 99 are more aggressive, now we can go on to test this. Right? We can test this hypothesis. Now, the method that you use to test a hypothesis just varies. Okay, and we'll get into some of those testing methods and stuff like that, but it varies, okay? And it varies on exactly what kind of answer that you might get. All right, so we'll get to that later, all right? But, so to do an experiment where, so in our example that we're talking about, what we might do is we might take a group of kids, similar ages, and we might put one group where they play Death Eater 99. Okay? And then we might take another group and have them play Rainbows and Ponies 99. Okay? All right? And then see how they interact, not with each other, but in their own groups. All right? And then we watch and we write down what we see. All right? That would be our experiment, to test our hypothesis on what happened. All right? And so when we do this, let's pretend, all right? And so we watch the kids playing Rainbows and Ponies 99, and we see that they're being super aggressive and beating each other over the heads. And we're watching the kids from Death Eater 99 being kind and playing with each other. And we're like, what is going on? We don't know what's happening. Because the whole reason we set up the experiment was because we saw these kids being super aggressive towards one another. And we know right before that they played Death Eater 99. So now what do? We go on to the next step. All right? We go on to the next thing, which is we draw conclusions. All right? So if we have done, we've set up our hypothesis, right, which was kids who play Death Eater 99 are aggressive. We did our experiment. It didn't work, right? Now we have to come to drawing conclusions. So if we did our experiment with these kids and they didn't do that, what do? We have to draw a conclusion, right? Our conclusion is that what? That kids who don't play Death, the kids, if they play Death 99, they're not more aggressive, right? Our hypothesis is wrong, right? It's wrong. But we still draw conclusions, right? We still list everything we did in the experiment. We still put it all in there. And so once we draw a conclusion, right, against our hypothesis, it's either supported, which means that our experiment worked, and that our measurements supported what we observed to begin with, or it wasn't supported. Okay? And what we do in this fourth step is any data collected will be analyzed by a statistical method that helps organize and refine the data. Okay? And then we're drawing conclusions that can be related to the goal of prediction. Okay? In other words, so we take all the data, we take everything that we've gathered, right, and we look at it, and then we say, okay, well, we have this, so what can we predict is going to happen? Okay? So let's say Death Eater did, when we did our experiment, let's say these kids in the controlled environment that we had in the experiment, they were more aggressive, right? And the kids that were not playing Death Eater 99 were kind and gentle, right? Then we could say, okay, that did support our hypothesis, right? And then we have a conclusion, right? So after we have a conclusion, what do we have to do? We have to report our results, right? Whether our results are good or bad, whether it supports our hypothesis or doesn't support our hypothesis, we have to report them, good or bad, okay? And we report everything about our experiment, good or bad. Okay, we put all the details in, so that way it can be done again. All right, so that way it can be done differently. That way it can be tested again by somebody else. Because here's the thing: somebody else might do the experiment and might come up with different results, and they might compare your study to their study. Okay? And this happens all the time. Sometimes one study is very similar to the other one, and they're going to use methodology from that study to figure out what happened. Right? Maybe kids 12 to 16, they are more aggressive when they play Death Eater 99, but kids 10 to 12 when they play Death Eater 99 aren't. Like it doesn't affect them at all. Or maybe it's the opposite. Okay? Are y'all following me? So the parameters, you may change the parameters on the experiment. Somebody else might do a slightly different experiment to prove it right or wrong. Okay? All right. So descriptive methods. All right? Here's some descriptive methods. The first one we're looking at is naturalistic observation. All right? So guys, naturalistic observation is this, right? It's simply this. You are observing in the natural environment. Okay? Whether it be animals, people, whatever. You're observing a natural environment, right? So let's say I was going to observe high school students. All right? Where would I do that in? In a high school, right? Okay, right? So, if it's going to be very specific, right? So if I was going to observe high school students in their social environment, where would I observe them at? Would I observe them in high school? No, because this isn't your social environment. Correct? This is not where you hang out. Yes, you hang out with people from time to time here, but this is not your hangout. Right? It might be this is kind of old school. It might be at the mall, right? In the bigger areas you might go to a mall, but you would go wherever you go, right? You would observe there, okay? Now there's some advantages and disadvantages to this, guys. All right? The advantage is you get a realistic picture of how behavior occurs in people's natural setting. All right, so when you do natural observation, you observe people how they really are in their setting. The disadvantage is you come into a couple things. Observer bias. Okay, observer bias is this. All right, is you have an opinion about what you want to see. All right, so if I'm the observer, right, and I'm trying to find something out, right, I may see what I want to see, right, if I'm the one doing the study. Okay, so I just may see what I want to see, and I may write down what I want to see in naturalistic observation. Okay, so that's the disadvantage. Okay, also a disadvantage is observer effect. Okay, observer effect. And this is if the people you're observing know you're observing them. Because when you do this, people act differently. Right? So if you know, it's like at school, okay? I would bet that most of you, when you're at school, you act differently than when you act differently at home than you do at school. Not all, but most of you do. Okay? And I was the same way when I was in high school. Like, I didn't act the same way at school that I did at home. All right? And it wasn't mean that I was worse or bad. I would just your personality is a little different sometimes. It just is, right? Some people close up when they're at high school. Some people are more outgoing, just depending on home life or whatever's going on. All right? So there's the observer effect. So if people know they're being watched, they tend to be different. Okay? All right? Blind observer. So here's something else in naturalistic observation which actually helps. And it's called blind observers, okay? So this is a person who doesn't know the question. It doesn't know what we're trying to answer whenever we're doing an observation. And then this person, so this person will have no preconceived notions about what they should be seeing, right? So this actually takes away observer bias, right? So if I have a question I'm trying to answer, and I go and I do naturalistic observation, right, I may see what I want to see, but if I have somebody that's a blind observer and they go out and do it, they don't know the question and they just write down everything they see, then it's very neutral, right? It's very objective. Do y'all get what I'm saying? All right, so a blind observer would be more objective. All right, so here's another one, laboratory observation, okay? So when we talk about laboratory observation, right, this is an artificial situation, right? And it might, the disadvantage for a laboratory observation, right, that would be a set-up experiment, right, in a laboratory, right? And the disadvantage to this is that it might result in artificial behavior, okay? That's the disadvantage. The advantage, though, is that it's a controlled environment for the observer. Okay, so you talk like two-way mirrors, right? Like you have somebody go in and you talk to somebody else, or like in our experiment that we talked about with the kids, right? They play the video game and then you see them interact, so you'd be behind a two-way mirror and you're just watching them, seeing what they're doing, right? It'd be in a laboratory experiment, you're watching what they're doing, And so you observe and you write everything down. They don't know you're observing them. Okay? All right. So that's laboratory observation. The next one is case studies. All right. So case studies. This is individual. This is where an individual is studied in greater detail. Researchers try to learn everything they can about the individual. Okay? That's what a case study is. All right? There's disadvantages to this as well. The disadvantage to this is they can't really apply the results to similar people. So if I studied Jacob, right, and I study him, like I can't apply everything that I've learned about him to Tony. Right? Because although they may be in the same grade, they may be the same age, right? They're two totally different people. They're similar in ways, but they're two totally different people. So I can't apply the case study I do on Jacob to what I do for Tony, right? So I can get lots of information and lots of details about his life, but I can't take that and I apply it to Tony. Are y'all following me? That's the disadvantage. The advantage, though, is you get lots and lots of detail, lots and lots of information. Okay? All right. Surveys. Here's the next one. Surveys. Y'all know what surveys are? Yes? Okay. All right. So surveys, right? This, you get to ask lots of questions about topics, right? And they do this either by telephone, internet, questionnaires, crazy people walking up to you with a clipboard. They don't really do that anymore. Like used to when you go into a mall, there'd be all these people. They'd come to you with a clipboard and be like, do you got a few minutes? We will give you $35 if you'll sit down and talk to us. And you're like, okay. And then you get in there and you're thinking like it's going to take 5 minutes. And you're like, yeah, I'm done. Like when it gets to the 10-minute mark, I'm like, I'm done. Yeah, that was totally a waste of my time. They don't do that anymore. But I haven't seen it in a long time. But anyway, because nobody's in the malls anymore. But they used to do these surveys like that, all right? So surveys are good. Here's the advantage of a survey, okay? There's lots of data for very large groups of people, right? So I can send out an email, correct? And I can send out to 1,000 people. I might get maybe 300 back, maybe 200. Hopefully I get 100, okay? I mean, hopefully I get 200, right? More likely you're going to get 100 back if you send it out to 1,000 people, all right? And I'll get lots of information back, okay? All right? That's the good part about surveys. Here's the disadvantage. You have to be careful about the group of people you survey. All right? You just have to be careful about it. People aren't going to give researchers accurate information. That's the other disadvantage to surveys, right? I send out a survey. People are going to tell you what they think you want to know, not actually what you want to know. All right? That's the disadvantage. All right? So you have to be careful about that. All right? So you may get skewed information. All right? All right. So that's all those. All right? So I talked about the scientific method for a moment, right? So you need to make sure you know the scientific method, you're right, which is to perceive the question, what is happening here, right? Then you form a hypothesis, which is a tentative explanation about an event. You have to test the hypothesis, which is about collecting data or analyzing results. Then you have to draw a conclusion about the success or failure to explain what the hypothesis or explain the event, all right? Then you report your results, all right? In other words, you tell exactly what happened, guys, good or bad or ugly. You tell exactly what happened, all right? So, and there's 4 ways of descriptive data and collecting methods, okay? Which is, we've already talked about all this. I'm just wrapping it all up, okay? There's 4 ways of descriptive data and collecting methods. There's naturalistic observation, which is what, guys? What is naturalistic observation?
Observing in the natural environment.
Exactly. Observing a natural environment. Laboratory observation, what is that? Right. Laboratory controlled setting. Okay? All right. What are case studies?
Studies on one person.
Right. Individual studies on one person, right? We learn all we can on that one person, right? Surveys. What are surveys? Right. How do we do surveys?
In person, large groups.
With a clipboard.
How will we do it this day and age? That's old school.
Email.
Yes, there we go. Email, internet, right? Phone. Right? Okay. All right. So, all right. Okay, guys. So that's where we're at right now. So I answered a lot of questions on that sheet. All right. So that gives you a lot of stuff on that sheet. All right. I'm going to post this video so you can go back and look at it if you need help on it. All right. The next thing we're going to look at is correlations, and I really don't like having to deal with correlations. I don't like dealing with statistics, all right, which is the math portion of the scientific part of
Don't say it.
psychology, all right? I don't like it, all right? So I'm going to breeze through. I'm going to like zoom through it because I hate it so bad. It was like my worst part of my classes, all right? I don't enjoy math, all right? But it's part of it, okay? So we have to go through it, all right? We have to. It's part of psychology. It's part of it. It's part of the science of psychology, all right? So we have to go through it. All right? You have to know what some of these terms are, guys, so that way when you do read a case study and you read the information, you can understand what they're talking about. That's why we have to understand those terminology. We have to understand what it's saying, okay? All right. Does anybody have any questions about anything that I've talked about today? Okay. All right. So I'm going to turn this off.